Goals this week. Hat-tricks everywhere. This week we're going to tell you the real reason as to why everyone scored hat-tricks this game week and why they weren't flukes, and the reason for it was the same for Man City, Brighton and for Spurs. You're watching The Fallout. Burnley 2, Spurs 5. Another demolition job for Spurs this week, and something that they'll continue to do if they keep doing this specific thing. Now, dropping Richarlison and starting Manor Solomon was the only change to their lineup, but it changed absolutely everything for Spurs and maybe shows us something a lot didn't anticipate from Ange Postecoglou. But before that, we have to have our weekly Maddison chat, don't we? Because this might have been his best match, and he had a very, very different role. Maddison only made one key pass in the match, and this was all down to a tactical masterstroke from our boy Ange Postecoglou, and Maddison was often the pass before the pass in this one, even though he's been Spurs' main creator so far this season, and this worked brilliantly. But how did Ange change his role? Well, let's take a look at the average positions and Manor Solomon's positioning. Manor Solomon is number 27. He's really high and obviously very close to Maddison here, okay? He's playing in that left wing role, but Maddison stayed close to him throughout. And Maddison's movement was the key in allowing Solomon to have time in the ball and create chances. Solomon made 5 key passes in this match, the most of any Spurs player. And here's a perfect example of how he was allowed to do this and why Maddison deserves a lot of the credit. Because his sacrificial second striker, Triple S, runs were so important for the team. So here, this is actually one of the goals. Heung-min Son, of course, scoring a hat-trick, and he scores in just a second. This is him here. This is Manor Solomon, and this is James Maddison. James Maddison makes that sacrificial run. Now, when we think of him, we think of him as someone who will want to be on the edge of the box. They would want to be knocking about here so that they can get those shots off. And, of course, he did get a shot off and scored a goal in this game. But without Maddison's run here, the passing lane doesn't open up for Heung-min Son. Let's move it on one. And you can see that Maddison actually, in terms of his body language, it's actually quite interesting, because if you zoom in there, he's not even looking at where the ball is. He's not expecting to get the ball, because he's making that sacrificial run to create a passing lane and, importantly, some space for a deadly striker to score a goal. And it's these types of runs that sort of displace the opposition, and they're so important. So Manor Solomon, of course, gets himself an assist from that. Some FPL points, and that's something Maddison misses out on. But he's making that run for the team. And if he doesn't make that run, then Tottenham don't score that goal. It really is as simple as that. If we move it along, this screenshot here is really important. And it also, it's so impressive from Spurs. Look at how deep Maddison is. And if you think about the midfield three of Spurs, you've got Basuma, Pape Sarr and Maddison here. So Maddison, who would normally be in this role, has dropped deep to pick up the ball. And what's actually really interesting, if we head over here, is it's something that they've done a lot of this year. It's this little sort of like bounce back. And if we get the ball here, Maddison actually picks up the ball here, I think, dribbles with it for a little bit. And the important thing that they want them to do is to play the way they're facing. But also, by playing, and he does this, he plays this tiny little pass, like a 3-yard pass to Pape Sarr. And Pape Sarr plays the ball back to him because he's playing the way he's facing. And then it's this change in tempo that for a second the Burnley defence think they're fine, we're okay, and Maddison's not in a place that we're concerned about up here. But he injects this life into the team. If we go to the screenshot of it, you can see you've got these 3 players here. And when it comes to Burnley players are really concerned about James Maddison. And that's understandable. In terms of any kind of briefing, that would have been a huge part of it. Stop James Maddison and we'll probably be okay. And there's 5 players there who've kind of got their eyes on Maddison, understandably, because he's got the ball. But what Maddison does brilliantly is plays that little sort of bump pass, freezes the opposition for a second. Porro moves into an interesting area of space here, and he takes out 5 players with 1 pass. 5 players with 1 pass. It's absolutely fantastic stuff. And if we move it on one more, you then create an overload you didn't realise was happening. And, of course, that passing lane, which, of course, leads to one hell of a goal for Heung-min Son and his hat-trick. But without taking those 5 players out of the game, that goal doesn't happen. So despite not getting the assist, Maddison is what makes this goal happen, and his movement was the biggest factor in Son getting his hat-trick. Stick around to find out why Maddison's movement was important for Erling Haaland and Evan Ferguson's hat-tricks as well, because it all ties in. For Burnley, do you want the good news or do you want the bad news? Let's start with the good news, which is Lyle Foster. I thought his movement for his goal, and actually the whole movement of the whole team, was really, really fantastic, actually, for this goal, because the goal moves from one side of the pitch to the other side of the pitch, and they get themselves into a great area and score a great goal. But Lyle Foster in particular, I think, was absolutely fantastic in terms of his movement. It is a team goal in terms of that driving of the pitch, that moving of the ball from one side to the other. And I don't think you can see Goodmanson here. But Goodmanson, right at the bottom of the screen there, he makes a real driving run. And that means that Udogie has to deal with him. But Lyle Foster's the player that I want to really focus on, because Lyle Foster's here. And Lyle Foster, he does brilliantly with his movement, because what he does is he keeps an eye on Van de Ven's back. And the reason he does that is because he doesn't want Van de Ven to be able to see what he's doing. Now, Van de Ven has a little look here, and he's thinking, okay, where are you, Lyle Foster? I know you're the guy I'm supposed to be marking. Let me zoom out. And Lyle Foster's just gently making his way past Udogie onto Van de Ven. But if we move it along one, what's really great is that actually Lyle Foster, he knows that Koleosho is going to make that darting run. He knows the pass is going to come down here, and he knows that the ball is probably going to end up in the 6-yard box, and he's going to want to go to that front post. So it's about the timing of your runs, and it's about your centre-back, your opponent, not knowing where you are. And I thought this was really, really strong play from him. Because if we move it forward, Van de Ven's had that one look, and as they're jogging back, he just keeps his eyes on the back of his shirt and makes it very difficult, stays on that blind side, and so at no point does Van de Ven know where he is. But if we zoom in again, he has to have another little look. And as soon as he has that little look, Lyle Foster knows that's almost the trigger for him to make his darting run. And he gets his rewards. He gets there, and then he's able to get his shot off before Van de Ven's able to make that challenge. So in terms of forward play, in terms of a really fast-flowing movement, I think this is something that is really, really strong for Burnley. What's really disappointing is the system. It's the 4-2-4. I don't think it works. I think it needs to change, and I really have no idea why they've gone with this system in the Premier League. I know the Premier League comes with its own challenges, but this Burnley team thrived last season with a 3-man midfield, and they dominated the midfield third all year long in the Championship. Now they're playing with a double pivot. They're asking Sander Berge to get forward at the same time. And this creates massive, massive holes centrally. If I go back to those average positions, I think that is damning in itself. I mean, look at those two centre-backs. They're shooting that way. Look at those two centre-backs and how alone they are. Like, that's not fair. And again, if you cleanse your mind for a second. Cleanse your mind, can you? Would you? Would you just cleanse your mind for a second? And I'm going to show you a screenshot. Now, if you've got no context at all, when do you think this is occurring in a game? Is this when a team is 3-0 down, trying to, force the game? Is this in the last few minutes of the game? No, this is in the middle of the first half, I think. And there are 4 players that you can see in the entire half. So you've not even got a goalkeeper that's really sort of sweeping and understanding what's going on. And maybe that's unfair. But if you played 3 in midfield, you would have some protection here, right? And if you had some protection here, you would have 2 centre-backs who would be focusing about this area here. But without that, you have someone with the ability of Heung-min Son who can make a darting run initially here and then a secondary movement there, and you're going to make life very, very difficult for themselves. That's not fair on the centre-backs. They need a bit of help. And they controlled games last year. I just don't understand it, if I'm honest. They're committing a lot of bodies forward by doing this. And Spurs' opening goal is that is a key example of this, because shut up shop, be smart. Burnley were 1-0 up at this point. Somehow they're allowing a 2v2 situation after having the ball in Spurs' defensive third. Burnley need a 3-man midfield. They need to abandon the 4-2-4 formation quickly, and Brownhill has to start for me. Now, before we get on to more hat-trick chat, we need to talk about Chelsea and why Forest have something that they don't. Now, before we get on to Chelsea's biggest problem, let's talk about Forest. Forest only registered 8 points away from home last season with only one win. That one win was against Southampton, of course, got relegated. But this is why it's different now. Now, despite having another whirlwind summer in terms of incomings and outgoings, Forest's cohesion when it comes to tactical execution and an understanding of opponents' weaknesses is clearly there. And this next screenshot demonstrates it perfectly. Now, this is in the lead up to the goal, but in terms of understanding the weaknesses of the opponent, I think it's really, really impressive what Nottingham Forest do, is that they congest the area and they don't give the opposition space. You can see from the body language of everyone, there's a focus in terms of not allowing a player any time. Alanga's positioning we'll get back to, and actually Caicedo, if we can touch on it for a second. Look, it's unforgivable. It's absolutely unforgivable. You can't be having that kind of touch as a professional footballer, full stop. Especially if you'd like to play central midfield, you can't be doing that. But life is made difficult because there aren't many options. Also, Conor Gallagher's positioning here, I think, is a little bit odd. You know, he actually does a dummy here, and then the pass goes to Caicedo. It's totally unnecessary. You'd much rather have him here, and then you'd have Enzo Fernandez there. You allow Caicedo to have a true understanding of that entire area of the pitch, and he will know that he's got more options and actually more passes that he can play, because there'll be a concern from those defenders to do otherwise. But instead, you've got a midfield there in Nottingham Forest that are really, really smart, because they know Caicedo's there. It's almost like a man marking job. That Awoniyi as well is on his way back if it needs be, and they get fortunate from the touch. But with Gallagher and Caicedo both in virtually the same position, Alanga's positioning is fantastic, and it cuts off so much of the pitch, which again could be, a little micro reason as to why Caicedo makes that terrible move, because Ben Chilwell is out of shot on the left-hand side, but because you don't have Gallagher anywhere near this area here to help to find that pass through, and they're getting on each other's toes, which we'll come back to in a second. Alanga, by having his positioning, he's able to cut out this entire area of the pitch, and that makes the pitch smaller. It makes it harder for Chelsea to be effective in terms of working their way through the thirds, and leads to a mistake. And then this happens to one of our most respected players. Disgusting from Awoniyi, who is fast becoming, let me make this clear. I'm going to say this now, and I'm going to say it with my chest. He is fast becoming one of the best strikers in the league. I did say it, didn't I? So what's the problem with Chelsea? The problem with Chelsea is balance. So what do I mean by this? No, not the players they have, but the tactical approach that they are using. Now, before I show you something criminal on this screen from the match, take a look at these heat maps. Can you see the problem? Well, all of the Chelsea midfielders are very biased towards the right-hand side. The problem with this is that the left-hand side is only taken up by Chilwell, meaning all Forest had to do really was negate Chelsea's right-hand side, and it's evident that they did that from their average positions. But wait until you see this. There are 4 players in pretty much the same position. And this is a huge part of the problem here for Chelsea. And it's a huge insight into how they struggled for patterns of play around the Forest box. They have lost their confidence already, it seems. It does feel very similar to last season. And Chelsea's shot map shows us exactly how unbalanced the team was against Forest. And it is an insight into something that needs to change fast. Pochettino is the right man to change it. But the state of flow with this Chelsea side is non-existent right now. And you're starting to feel that sort of quicksand and that fear that we saw last year. And you worry that you're going to see again with the Chelsea side that is very young. Brighton 3, Newcastle 1, and I have found the reason as to why Newcastle struggled so much in this match, and it is clear as day. But first, the reason Evan Ferguson scored a Premier League hat-trick at just 18 years old. We'll talk about the screamer, of course, but not before discussing the third goal and why this is the one that speaks volumes and is fascinating in terms of an insight into what a lot of top teams are doing this season. So Matoma, who often you would see out here, actually comes into a more central position here. And Gilmour plays a progressive pass to him. Now, from a defensive point of view, the immediate danger once he gets that ball and gets that ball in between the lines is João Pedro here. That's because he's central and would be the person that Matoma plays that 1-2 with. But Pedro doesn't actually receive the ball here. But his positioning means that Evan Ferguson doesn't have to assume that backboard position. Now look at Ferguson here, and you can only just about see him on the right-hand side there, okay? He's on the half turn. This allows him to receive the ball and shoot within a matter of 3 touches. Now, he gets a hell of a lot of luck for that goal. And actually, I'm going to say something pretty dangerous here. And I think Evan Ferguson's amazing. Look, he's 18. He's built like a man already. He's ready to go. He's scoring hat-tricks in the Premier League. But it was an unnecessary hat-trick, if I can allow that to be said, because the first goal obviously is a tap-in. And, Nick Pope has an absolute disaster there. And the second goal we'll show you in a second. The stats don't look good for João Pedro because he actually only received 3 progressive passes. And this kind of influence is something that is not really quantifiable by stats. It's much more of a qualitative or eye test thing where you can see it through the average positions and his heat map that he was very advanced and close to Evan Ferguson. This allowed Ferguson to not be bullied by the Newcastle centre-backs and to have time on the ball several times. But João Pedro and Ferguson's influence doesn't stop there, as it actually exposed the Newcastle midfield and could be something that we see a lot of teams do this season. This screenshot is the most important screenshot of the whole match, in my opinion, because it shows so much for both teams. So, first thing to say, Veltman becomes inverted, and Isak deals with that. So that's okay. That's absolutely fine. But after that, let's have a look at this midfield and how they're set up. You've got a midfield 3 there. And look at that midfield line. Now, firstly, if they want to press, they need to be higher up than that because Gilmour has enough time to actually have a bad touch and still get his pass away and actually kind of sucks in the opposition, which I know is something that Brentford do. I don't think that was really the idea on this occasion. But secondly, it shouldn't be Bruno Guimaraes, who is the 6, who makes that initial press. If he's the one at the base of the midfield, he should be here. And I didn't really understand what they're trying to do here because it creates a massive gap for Brighton and they play through it. And it happened a few times during this match. And I think the thing to remember is that this high-intensity style, against teams that aren't as great at playing the ball through, you might be able to get away with it. I also think Tonali has come off in 2 games now, and pretty quickly after that, they have conceded as well. So he is proving to be somewhat of a problem in terms of his irreplaceability in that midfield. But also, I think, pinch of salt here. You've played Man City, Liverpool and Brighton. You won't have a set of games like that in terms of teams that can play the ball brilliantly, for a long time, right, this season. So the ball gets played straight through this gap. Let me just show you. It plays through this gap to Evan Ferguson. Now, the problem with the midfield line of Newcastle is that one pass played through the middle like this means that the centre-backs are then left to question if they should engage or not. And again, I think in terms of areas and spaces and stopping those passes to be able to go through the lines, this kind of gap between the midfield and the defence can't occur. Let me just make it a bit clearer. That can't be happening. It's an absolute, it's a C there for Evan Ferguson to deal with. And because of this, Dan Burn doesn't know what to do with himself. He's also got to deal with Pascal Gross, who's another player that's not been picked up. And Evan Ferguson then has an outrageous amount of room to work with because Dan Burn doesn't feel comfortable to go with him. Now, maybe if it was Sven Botman, it might have been different and he might have gone with him and just dealt with it and got that touch in or seen the pass and dealt with it. But Dan Burn has been playing left back for a long time and he finds himself getting a little bit stranded. Meanwhile, Brighton have an overload on the left-hand side all of a sudden with João Pedro, Matoma and Estupinian on that left-hand side, which means that Evan Ferguson didn't want to shoot, and I think the main reason that he did shoot is because he had so much time. He probably could have played the ball into either of those two, and the chance still would have been created for the team. So either way, This is terrible from Newcastle, in my opinion. I think it's more terrible from Newcastle than it is brilliant from Ferguson. He had so much time to find the net there. Great finish, of course. And a stat that tells us a lot about Bruno Gomes not really being suitable as a six or a six against teams where he's got to be defensive is that in these types of matches, he didn't make a single interception in this game. In fact, none of the Newcastle midfielders made an interception in this game. These teams that play through the thirds will always look to play the ball centrally. And Eddie Howe's got to realise that pretty quickly because you're going to be playing some good teams pretty soon and for the rest of the season. And the expectations are that little bit higher this year. Man City 5-1 against Fulham, another hat-trick, and this one is the final and most important example as to why everyone is scoring hat-tricks right now. Man City once again brilliant in the Saturday 3 p.m. kickoff, but this season Man City's tactics are really something to behold, and even without Pep present, he's still influencing matches perfectly and the entire Premier League. Before that, this is why Jeremy Doku offers something completely different for Man City and why Pep is playing him from the left, even though he's played most of his career over on the right. So Doku is a dribbler. He has immense speed. And this means that Fulham really didn't want to allow him any space out wide. And you can see here the problems that it creates for Fulham as Tete is caught between two minds. You can see him here. He doesn't know what to do. Does he stay tight or does he do what you normally see from a back four is that you would stay within the 18-yard box. That would be your normal back four to protect the goal. And, you know, if they have to go wide, then great. But the problem with someone like Doku is that he is so fast. If he gets the ball, you've got to be tight as a defender. Otherwise, you're going to be in huge, huge trouble. And so he doesn't know what to do. And what that leads to is an enormous amount of space. Actually, a goal comes from this. And with what Pep's trying to do in terms of having two strikers, which we thought might happen at the start of the season. We're very proud of calling that one. By having those bodies in the box and allowing the balls to be played through those channels from the movement that's been created there, Haaland actually gets the ball and he's able to move the ball across and Alvarez scores himself a goal. As for the reason he's on the left wing, it's all because of Foden. Pep, over the last few months, has persistently played inverted wingers in his system. And Doku is no exception. Having him on the left offers that ability to cut inside, but to also have the guile and the ability to go down to the byline. It's a really, really interesting decision from Pep Guardiola to have Doku and to use him on that left-hand side. But it allows them to play similar to the way that they did last season when you had Mahrez and Grealish and you had two players that could go both ways. And having that dexterity is just an absolute disaster if you're a defender, because if you know that someone is really right-footed, you can just focus them and try to sort of show them down the line. But when they can go both ways, what actually happens is you don't do either. And what actually also happens is that you end up being square on instead of side on because you're concerned about which way that player is going to go. And having Doku on that left-hand side as someone who can do either of those is pretty frightening, I've got to be honest. And this right here is the final reason as to why everyone was scoring hat-tricks this weekend. It's the positioning of Alvarez. As we know, Man City have been playing as a front two. What's so important here is that by Alvarez picking up this area of space, it means that Haaland, and you can see from his body language, he doesn't have to be that backboard. A bit like Evan Ferguson didn't need to be that backboard. And a little bit why Heung-min Son didn't have to be that backboard either. And he's allowed to play on the shoulder. They get a little bit of luck with that pass from him. But, you know, it's not a fluke that everyone who scored a hat-trick this weekend, they were all beneficiaries of having someone in the team playing high up and close to them in spaces. And this here is why Man City utilised this tactic better than anyone else. Alvarez, he can be, I mean, what should we call it, a space manipulator at times, but also he has that ability to make those striker runs like we've just seen from Erling Haaland himself. And it won Man City a penalty on this occasion. Alvarez had 20 touches in the final third for Man City, the joint most of any City player. He has two positions within this team and he plays them simultaneously. He's really good. For Fulham, it's massively one to forget. The absence of Palhinha was felt here in how Man City were able to play those balls into Alvarez into the final third and to hurt them in those central areas. And you've seen that if you watched the fallout 2 weeks ago. We were talking about Phil Foden and how he hurt Newcastle in that game by being in those central areas and having those bodies up there as well. I think you feel that Palhinha would have been in those positions to negate those balls and he would have been there. So Man City were generally too good for Fulham, and whilst score would have been a win for them, it wouldn't have been as high, I think, if Palhinha is playing in this game. Liverpool 3, Aston Villa 0, and I'm sorry, Aston Villa fans, you've pumped two teams, and I haven't put you on the fallout because there was just too much going on, and then this happens, and here you are. But welcome back, and you're going to have lots of wins this year. But there does seem to be a clear weakness when it comes to you guys. When it comes to Liverpool, are Liverpool back? Has Klopp figured this out? Is there a screenshot that's going to reveal all of that? Stick around. Before that, let's start with Aston Villa and what their biggest problem is this season, not just this game. I think this is what was happening when Aston Villa tried playing out from the back, which they did, and then just not wonderful at it, it felt like. Liverpool would shut off the options to the centre-backs in particular, here and here. And despite this, Villa still tried to play out, using Pau Torres in particular. And eventually, Pau Torres actually concedes a corner in doing this. Liverpool then score from that corner. Trying to play like this is what hurt them against Newcastle, and it has cost them again. But this is where it becomes really interesting from a Liverpool perspective, because this is a screenshot from the second goal. So as you can see, Trent is quite central here, and this is something that Klopp's been working towards for some time, and it worked brilliantly in this one. Trent made 8 accurate long balls against Villa, and as well as registering 5 key passes, and this could be the start of him beginning to cook this season, which I really hope happens, because I did say at the start of the season he was having a good season, and I'm starting to get worried. Trent, especially after last week. He's also listed as a midfielder again in the England squad, which I think is really exciting because I just like his passing and his vision. It's absolutely amazing. But what we haven't pointed out is the body positions of the Liverpool front three and how tuned in to the tactics of Trent they are. Salah, Nunez and Diaz. Here they are. 1, 2, 3. Look at them. You can see what they're trying to do. You can see where they're heading. They are all heading. Well, Diaz actually is coming a bit centrally, but Nunez is ready to go. Mohamed Salah is ready to go in behind. And this is why Diaz is making that movement centrally and why Nunez picks up that position in the channel. But that's not the only thing that's really revealing from this moment in the game, because have a look at the Villa midfielders. Why are they where they are? Why are they so high? Well, they think they're fine. And the reason they think that they're fine is because of 2 players, Szoboszlai and McAllister. And those 2 players, you can even see in terms of Szoboszlai, he's offering up, and he would offer up a little pass, if it was available to him. But actually, those 2 were playing bait, really. So it's a bit high like Newcastle, but it's also similar to Maddison in that game between Tottenham and Burnley. The Burnley defence thought they were okay because Maddison, a danger man, had the ball there, and one of those players that are going to get into those half spaces a lot of the time, they weren't in that position. They were in front of them, and so they think that they're okay. But in fact, it was bait, and of course, Trent does what Trent does, which is play an absolutely fantastic pass over the top into that space in behind, and that high line of Aston Villa gets caught out pretty emphatically. And this wasn't something that happened once. It happened throughout the game, and the heat maps of Curtis Jones and Dominic Szoboszlai tell us exactly what their tactical instructions were. They looked to receive the ball in sort of semi-mid-wide spaces in the middle third. This was a game to allow the front three to be on the front foot, which meant that they didn't have to drop deep to receive the ball. Szoboszlai had 71 touches in the match, with most of them being in the middle third, and his role in the team is something that Klopp has designed perfectly, in my opinion. By being able to receive the ball wide in the middle third, it allows Trent to be central without losing width. It also allows Salah to stay high and not have to drop deep. It's really, really clever stuff. By the way, we are super close to 280,000 subscribers. If you haven't subscribed, please do hit that notification bell as well and hit the like button. It would be massively appreciated by me and the entire team at JaackMaate.